Hi,
Hi.
it's good to see you, Dave.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Tom, I see you as well, and Deborah.
Usual suspects.
Most of the usual subject. I see Barbara's joining. That's great, and I see Jen in the background. Jen, is this the last Finance Committee meeting that you will be joining in your current role?
We don't know until someone new is hired and trained. So I'm sure I'll be here for at least one more and through the budget workshop.
Okay, all right. Well, I know that you're eager to move on to your new role, and I'm very excited that you'll be taking on some new responsibilities. We're going to hate to see you go, but I know that's inevitable. But thank you for hanging on while we transition somebody new into your current position.
Absolutely.
Barbara, I see you're joining. Great. Why don't we let's go ahead. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. It's 3 o'clock, and I'm going to call the roll. I'll start with Commissioner David Cahill.
Here.
Commissioner Barbara McKenzie.
Here.
Great to see you, Barbara. Thank you. Commission Vice Chair Thomas Hauser.
Here.
Thank you, Tom. And Commission Chair Deborah Doyle.
Here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Pursuant to California Government Code Section 54953, any and all votes during this teleconference meeting will be taken by roll call. Now we have public appearances. I know we're going to have public comments later, but this would be public appearances, members of the public who wish to address the commission regarding matters not on the agenda should request recognition. Is there anybody on the call from the public who would like to address us about something not on the agenda? Jen, do we have any written comments from the public on any item that's not on the agenda?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Then let's move on to discussion item 4.1, the financial reports for January. As I mentioned, first of all, thanks Myrna and Randy for getting the reports out early to the members of the committee. As I'd indicated in the note that Jen forwarded, we have a lot to cover this month. And so what I'm going to suggest, and I feel like it's about time for us to make this transition anyway, is that we're going to review the summary report in detail, and we will ask Myrna to field any questions you have on any of the other reports. So just a couple of comments about the summary report to keep in mind. As you know, we collect property taxes twice a year. We've had the first collection period back in December. The second one will be in April. We would expect property taxes to be at or somewhat above 50% of our budgeted amount. We're 7 months into the year, but as you know, collection of sales tax lags 2 months. So we're looking at projected revenues for 5 months of the year. That's about 41.7% of the total. And from an expense picture, we're 7 out of 12 months into the year. And so 58.3% is sort of the benchmark that we would be looking at to see if we're trending above or below our budget targets. Myrna, it's great to see you. I don't see Randy on the call. I think it's going to be all you. Would you take us briefly through the summary report, please? Oh, you're on mute.
well, as you noted, revenues are on track, and not much has changed from the mid-year review, which was last month. Property taxes is scheduled to come in on time, and so is sales tax. February month came in and is not posted here, but it came in at $1.6 million in revenue. So that's good news. We're on track on the revenue. On the expenditure side, again, not much has changed regarding our expenditures. As you can see, our rate of expenditure on salary and benefits is slightly lower because when benefits were budgeted, they were budgeted at full rate, ensuring that benefits would be covered fully. And as well with some savings projected in capital because some projects are delayed, for example, the Petaluma. So having said that, we are on target to be within our budget with some savings on the expenditure side. So at this point, although we have $8.8 million, almost $8.9 million budgeted for from fund balance, at this time we haven't tapped into that yet, but closer to the end of the year. So I am highlighting that we will not, it looks like we will not be tapping into the fund balance as much as we had expected. So those are the two highlights on these. If you wanted additional information, we could dive into that.
Well, I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to open it to other members of the committee first. Anybody have any questions for Myrna on any of the data you're seeing on this report? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to just dive in. So one question, and this is, I guess, a fairly simple-minded question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The line for rents and leases, besides our rents, what kinds of leases are included in that line item?
Some leases could be the leases for our photocopiers, for example. They're major equipment like that.
Okay. For equipment leases, are those typically at a constant dollar amount per month?
Generally, yes, but for photocopying, if there are variances on the number of photocopies that are done, month to month, that you might see some variances.
Okay, and I can understand. I remember I had a photocopier lease. It worked that way. I'm just curious as to why this number is not, with rents, I would expect it to be constant every month, right? The rent is not changing, or if it is increased at some point, that would then continue at the new rate. I'm just surprised that we're seeing the fluctuations that we are. We're a little bit, this is one line item, we're a little bit over projection, not a lot, but a little bit.
Yes, I know that we can look at these items. Right now, I have kicked, as you know, coding has been a topic that and considered a project for the Budget and Finance Committee. So I have kicked off a phase one of this project where I've started to have discussions with staff so they can understand how coding works, the importance of coding, communicating with managers in terms of coding. And so it is a bigger project in terms of opportunity for training and staff development. So you will be seeing corrections in coding from one line item to the next in the next few upcoming weeks. So overall, the goal is by the end of the year, there will be better reporting on the coding side of items.
Okay, that would be great. And then I guess I have a comment on the capital expenses line, and this is probably more in your direction. I understand that we're going to be looking at the facilities master plan coming up, and we've been waiting on that. So I understand that we want and need that kind of guidance. I'm just going to say it's frustrating to me that we've actually been able to spend so little of the budgeted capital expenses, and I realize that there's been a significant delay in the Petaluma project. I guess my feeling, and I would appreciate it if you just comment, and you can tell me I'm way off base here, but I realize that projects take a while to gear up and get going, but given the fact that there are sometimes unexpected delays that continue for a long time, I would like us to do a better job of having Plan B projects ready to move into the pipeline rather than just putting everything on hold. We're on track to spend only a small percentage of what was a very large projected capital expenditure, and that's disappointing to me.
Yes, I fully understand that, and your idea of having Plan Bs ready to go, that's one we will definitely keep in mind. In this case, the Petaluma project, as you know, was delayed because of the fire suppression issue, and it just took a long time, a lot longer than we anticipated, to work through that process with the city. With the other projects that we had going, the Guerneville refresh and the Central refresh, the delays there were the kinds of issues that everyone in the country's been facing with supply chain issues. We had these orders put in a long time ago, and it just took that long to get materials to us. So I'm hopeful that as we move into the next year, that kind of thing will diminish. And so we won't have the slowdowns from supply chain issues, and we will have a Plan B.
That's all. If the supply chain, I know we're not the only ones facing that, but just to be ready to pull something else into the queue if we can, I think would be a benefit. So, okay, thank you. Tom, I'm sorry, I just noticed you have your hand up. I apologize if I missed you. Please go ahead.
No, you just keep talking. That's okay. So I was patient.
No, that was
my
the last
suggestion
thing.
is slightly different than maybe a Plan B. It's to categorize things that we are committed to, and we have $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is, that we have to keep available for, say, Petaluma. And so we have a list of things that we've committed that we know we have to spend, and then other items that we haven't committed, and see, because it's the haven't committed that we could possibly spend in a Plan B or something like that. That would be my suggestion.
Well, and I'm
Just
going
a thought.
I'm going to piggyback on what you've said, because all I'm saying is if we have some items that we have committed to, but we haven't started working on them yet because we were focused on other things, if there are delays, let's go to the next item on the list and try to get it started. I realize that we have limited capacity in the facilities group. We can't overwhelm them with too many projects, but we also, in some cases, have no control over the amount of time we're going to be delayed, and it's just unfortunate and frustrating.
I am hearing now from staff that the Guerneville project will be completed before the end of the fiscal year. So that's news.
That would be great. I think we'll all welcome that. Tom, your hand's still up. Did you have something else?
I'm just slow at changing things.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, okay, but Barbara, I thought I lost you, but you just moved for some reason on my screen. Any other questions, comments, concerns related to the summary report? All right. Did you have any questions for Myrna on any other report that was in the packet? I did not either. And Myrna, I hope you can take this a little bit of a vote of confidence. I think we're feeling a lot more comfortable with what we're seeing. Tom, you've got a hand up. Go ahead.
The major revenue sources allocation. I think she's going to have a comment on that.
Well,
I
that's,
think she did it, created it.
well, that's, that
We can
is
take it out
another.
of order, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, no, that's, you know, I meant in terms of the financial reports. Did you have any? Because if we don't, we have plenty of other things to cover. So if there are no additional questions or comments, I'm going to suggest that we move to item 4.2, which is the presentation by Bartel Associates. Do we have somebody from Bartel on the line with us, Myrna?
Yes, we heard that, let's see, Doug Pryor is with us today from Bartel Associates. They completed 2 studies that they will be presenting with you today. And I did share with some early comments and questions that we received from the Finance Committee.
Okay, that's great. Doug, I'd like to welcome you. I very much appreciate you being here. And I'm gonna turn this over to you in just one second. But I did have one comment I wanted to make, please, sir, and that's there's an enormous amount of information that your group has put together, and I'm sure that we could, if time permitted, we could spend many hours delving into it. What I'm going to ask is that we collectively sort of begin with the end in mind. You know, I'll say that as a finance committee, we have 2 principal concerns that we're hoping you'll help us address. The first is we want to be able to continue to attract and retain the highest caliber of employees. You know, the people here at the Sonoma County Library are really the most important factor in delivering great service and product to our constituents. If we can't attract people and retain them, that's going to be difficult to continue to do. And employee benefits like retirement and retiree healthcare are key components of our ability to attract and retain talent. So, you know, we want to, as a committee, feel comfortable that we're going to be in good shape on a long-term basis in continuing to provide these. And we recognize that we have some catching up to do. And we're going to be looking for your guidance as far as what the economic options are to us to meet our obligations and put us in the best long-term financial picture. I realize we have several different paths going forward. So that's all I'm going to say is that those are, I would say, the big questions that are on my mind. And I think I can speak for other members of the committee, but I'm going to turn it over to you, and please share with us your expertise and help us understand what's going on.
Thank you. Good to be here today. And let me go ahead and screen share. Oh, wait. Again. There. So first of all, there is a lot of detail in these reports, and I certainly don't want to pull you through all the details, but rather than just starting with the unfunded liability and the contributions, I want to give a little bit of background information to have a little bit of perspective, sort of understand help understand where the numbers are coming from, and perhaps where they're going in the future a little bit better. So I'm going to start here with the Opeb report. Hopefully that's shared of two screens here. I hope I shared the right screen. But this is the.
You have, and I'm sorry, I have one question for you just procedurally. Okay. Would you like us to ask questions as you go, or would you like us to hold questions to specific points where you'll?
I think I would love to have questions as we go along, but whatever. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. This group, you'll quickly find out this group is not shy, Doug. But
okay, that's good. I like that. So, so let me go ahead and start in, and I think you have the full report in your packet. I'm going to kind of jump through the key points and try to relatively quickly get you to kind of the bottom line here. But kind of a little bit of background, I wanted to start with what are these benefits, right? What they are is, for employees retiring directly from the library, they're eligible to enroll in the Pemka, the Calpers healthcare program, and have the library pay a portion of the premium. The library pays somewhere between 80 to 84%. Up to the Kaiser premium, depending on which employee classification there is. And then those payments is really kind of 3 tiers, as you see across this row, depending on when people are hired. And the library then pays, for the first tier up to employee plus 2 service, up to employee plus 2 coverage, basically family coverage. There's no service requirement for tier 1, tier 2, employee only coverage with 10 years of service, employee plus 1, so dual coverage paid by the library up to the Kaiser premium, those percentages with 20 years. And then finally, for the final tier with 15 years of service, employee plus 1. So, and then the benefit even within the tiers varies a little bit in terms of how long it's paid. For the first 2, it's paid pre and post age 65, and the final tier it's paid only pre-65. But overriding all of this is, I should say, as a minimum, is what we do call the Pemka minimum benefit, which is on this following slide, which is because you participate in Pemka, you're required to pay a minimum amount to all retirees towards their healthcare benefits. So libraries on what's called the unequal method. So you're phasing into this full amount of $149, not doing a good job of highlighting that, $149 per month. So currently it's about $37 a month paying for retirees. In addition to all this, the library for all tiers reimburses Medicare Part B premiums. Okay, so that's really the benefits we're looking at. And real quickly, because this is going to come up in the liabilities, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about what's known as the implied subsidy. So let me kind of explain what that is. This is an illustration here in this center chart here. And what you see is across the x-axis is age. The green line here is just a sample premium used for illustration of $600 a month. It's the same premium Pemka charges regardless of age. And as we know, as we get older, we use more medical services, right? And so what the blue line is showing is really the cost of providing medical coverage at the various ages. As we go left to right, we're getting older. So you see at age 64, what you have is that's about a $600 cost of providing medical coverage. Pemka charges $800 cost of providing medical coverage. There's a $600 premium they're charging. So where does that difference come from? Well, it comes from the left-hand side. It's the active employees that are not going to the doctor as often or generally healthier. And so they're charging that same $600 premium for the actives, but it's really only costing $400. And so that $200 difference is a subsidy that's implied between the active premium going to pay the retiree. So that's kind of going to be in these liabilities is this implied subsidy, the difference between the $800 and $600. So that's hopefully as far into the weeds as we get with like kind of technical details. Of course, Pemka is a massive cost sharing system. There's over 500,000 covered lives. There's over 1,000 agencies. So it's certainly not as simple as taking a premium from the active and sending it over to your retiree. There's all sorts of things going on here, but that's the general concept. Okay.
Excuse me, Doug, we have a question from Barbara.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, could you give us the full name for whatever PEMHCA is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's the Public Employers Medical and Healthcare. Drawing a blank now on the A.
Okay,
Yeah, so
Okay.
sorry
and I
about that. Yeah,
yeah, and I see on your slide that the library joined that in 2018. And so I think
Right.
just for clarification purposes, people need to know, my understanding is our employees used to be part of the Sonoma County Healthcare Collective, or, that's where they got the healthcare from. And then the county did not want to cover our employees or have our employees in their pool at a certain point. So we had to go out and find different insurance, and that's when we became insured through the Calpers PEMHCA.
Pemka, yeah,
Right.
so I'm
And-
sorry, so it's Public Employees Medical and Hospital Care Act.
Okay, but that's why it shows this funny date of 2018, because we had a major change in our ability to provide healthcare at that time. And so that's why we joined this. I've never heard of this particular organization. I just know that we switched our
Yeah.
employee healthcare coverage
So-
via CalPERS. So,
Yeah, and that's it, setting aside the acronyms and the names, right? This is the medical insurance program that CalPERS provides. That's right. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about, participants that are covered in this valuation. So 193 employees, as you can see, very few of the tier 1 left at this point, 12 tier 1 employees, 53 in tier 2, and 128 in tier 3. So you get a feel for, for the most part, you have, a good chunk of people now in that final tier 3 benefit level. For retirees, you have about 99 receiving benefits. The other kind of oddity, I think, or a unique feature of Pemka is that if an employee retires directly from an agency and waives medical coverage at that point in time, then you obviously don't have to pay any part of that retiree's medical from wherever they're getting it. But Pemka requires you to allow those retirees to elect back in future periods. So you have 53 former employees retired directly from the library, decided to waive coverage, but could, in theory, elect back in to get a benefit in future periods. So 99 retirees receiving benefits, as I mentioned before, and you have this other group out there, 53, that could elect back in. It's very unlikely. If they did elect back in, they would get that minimum $150 or a portion of that $150 benefit. So they would get today, if they elected back in, about $37 per month. So we don't expect many at all to elect back in. The library is pre-funding with the CRBT. So this is the CalPERS Opeb Trust, and is pre-funding with strategy 3. So that's of the 3 strategies, the most conservative. And you can kind of see the target asset allocations of the various strategies. So within the strategy that the library is investing in, about 49% is in fixed incomes. You have another 16% in tips, and about a 22% equity exposure. So,
Doug, I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna because I see you're now getting into the funding, and I had one question on the benefits, but I also have a question here. In terms of the benefits, and forgive me, I don't have, I'm thinking about this from my own individual perspective, which may be completely wrong, but so I think about myself and my wife. We have Medicare, we pay for Part B, and we have a supplemental health insurance plan that we also pay for. If I understood what you were saying in terms of benefits, the library pays for the Medicare Part B expenses for our retirees, and is what then is Pemka? Is that like the supplemental piece in addition to that?
That's right. So let me quickly roll down to 21, 22. So here are the premiums that Pemka charges. And so let's take a common plan. For example, here's Kaiser. So, and then what we have is non-Medicare eligible and Medicare eligible premium. So let's take single coverage for Kaiser in 2022. Pemka charges $857 per month at age 65 for someone that's Medicare eligible. Medicare becomes primary, and that premium drops all the way down to 303 roughly, right? So the Medicare Part B premium, I forget now where that is, 130, something like that per month.
Right.
So, right. So overall, there's a significant reduction in the cost of the overall premium, right? Because the retiree would go from 857 down to basically 302 plus maybe 130. So maybe, $430, right?
Okay. And in our case, if I understood what you said on one earlier slide, our Pemka payment is tied specifically to Kaiser. Is that correct? Or is Kaiser just an example of what?
No, Kaiser, let me flip back up, but that's right. It's tied to a percentage of Kaiser. So you pay a premium up to a percentage of the Kaiser premium. That's the cap. The percentages are these that vary from 80 to 84%. And then, whether the Kaiser premium being used is employee or employee plus one or employee plus two, which is family, depends on kind of the tiers and how much service someone has.
Okay. And so this, in terms of the benefit that this provides to retirees, they're collecting Medicare, or they're getting Medicare Part A. This would be Medicare Part B that we pay for, plus we're paying for a significant percentage of Kaiser coverage. What about prescription drugs, Medicare Part D? Are we involved in any benefits that?
Not that I'm aware of. No, that's not.
Okay.
That's not a Medicare, only Medicare Part B.
Only Part B. Okay,
Right.
Thank you. So that was the only question I had. I see you're transitioning now toward the funding of it. So I'm just going to take a quick poll from the group. Does anybody have any questions about the benefits that we provide before Doug starts to get into how those are financed? Okay, I think I was the only one who was confused, Doug. But I do have a question about these three strategies. You say the library's using strategy 3, which seems to me to be a very conservative strategy. Who decides that?
Well, that's decided by the library. I don't have the history on the decision, or if you're in a different fund at one point in time or not, but certainly that's decided at the agency level. Unlike Calpers for the pensions, where you give them your money and they decide how it's invested. Right here, you have each agency has the option to select which strategy they want to implement.
Barbara, I'm going to ask you: is it the commission that makes the decision, or is it the library administration?
Well, again, this just started in terms of the healthcare benefits through this PEM thing, whatever, started in
Pemka.
2018. So before then, I don't know where the investment strategy came from, but once we joined this, I'm sure that this was made by the CFO at the time. It did, as far as I know, it did not come before the finance committee. And so it was administration or CFO.
Oh, okay, thank you. Myrna, I'm just going to flag this one for you. I'd like to take this offline and discuss it with you. I don't know who makes the ultimate call, but this strategy seems like a poor choice. Please go ahead, Doug.
Okay. So for strategy 3, right, obviously the most conservative of the 3 strategies, and as you might expect, we have this table, but of the 3 strategies, the most conservative leads to kind of the lowest long-term expected return. This is based on a model we've put together where we've surveyed some outside independent investment advisors. So what we don't show here is really kind of the risk associated, right? I mean, if you were guaranteed these rates here, it would be crazy not to select strategy one, right? But the reason some agencies are not in strategy one is because with the lower return, there's also, in theory, lower risk, and that's borne out historically and certainly is expected in the future to have less volatility around these returns. But we're for this investment strategy, we're recommending a 4 3/4% long-term return assumption. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of cover just some key assumptions. Let's talk a little bit first about what the funding policy is. I don't think I mentioned the word trust, but let me just kind of make sure we're all on the same page with respect to what that means. Money that goes into the CERBT can only be used to pay benefits to retirees in the future, right? So if you put money in the trust and you need it for something else down the road, it can't be used for other purposes, only for the benefits we're talking about in the original few slides. What the funding policy has been is 2.25 million was put in, I think initially, and then another $750,000 has been going in and expected to go in through 2028. And then in addition to that, the library is paying the pay-as-you-go costs outside of the trust and not reimbursing itself for those costs. So basically, at this point in time, the trust is growing by investment income and plus the $750,000 annually. Okay.
Excuse me,
I
does
see
we
a
have
question
a
from
question
Dave
here?
Cahill and
Okay.
then Tom Hauser.
So please, I apologize. Please speak up, but I don't have everyone's picture.
Yeah.
So if someone raises their
Oh.
hand, I'm not going to see it, but that's great if you could just, yeah.
Go ahead,
I'd
Dave.
like to go back briefly to the three strategies.
Uh-huh.
How can we calculate risk during Putin's war? We've seen a collapse of the Russian stock market today. And it seems to me that strategy 3 might be the right strategy because, for example, I'm sure that Calpers probably is not, or this entity here is not heavily invested under global equity and Russian sovereign debt. But nonetheless, the whole system is tossed around. And it seems to me if we want to minimize risk, we'd better hold on to fixed income stuff.
Dave, I'm going to suggest that Doug, forgive me if I'm going to say that your expertise is not an investment strategy, but rather in doing the analysis. We may want to, let's set this aside as a separate topic for a finance committee meeting where we focus on the investment strategy with CFO Myrna Lopez. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, that's fine.
Okay. Tom, you have a question also. You're on mute.
Yes. My memory or understanding of on page 11, where you have the funding policy, the valuation there, we decided a few years ago that we were behind in keeping this up to what we needed, so we should pay extra money. So
Right.
what's the baseline that we're paying? Are we catching up? Are we getting further behind? That's what I'd really like to know.
Yeah, I think that kind of answered kind of later on towards the end when we look at projections, but you have an unfunded liability here. The 750, your current strategy policy of paying the $750,000 and then not seeking reimbursement for the benefit payments from the trust is on track to pay down your unfunded liability over a reasonable period of time. So I think we have some projections later on that will answer that at least in part. But it's a few slides later.
Thank you.
Okay. With any other questions, or should I move on?
I think you can move on. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out
Okay.
for questions, Doug, and I'll call them out.
Thank you. So let's, again, there's a lot you mentioned, Andy, there's a lot of detail in here. Let me kind of jump through the assumptions, get to the assets. What you really have as of June 30th, these are in thousands of dollars, as of June 30th, 2021, about $8.3 million set aside in the trust. There was a good return for 2020-21, 13.6%. That return, was higher in the lower strategies, certainly, but it was still exceeded assumptions, as you can tell.
Yep.
And so 8.3 million. Now, when we calculate recommended contributions, we actually don't use the 8.3 million. What we do is we're using an actuarial value of assets. We're smoothing out the fluctuations in the market value to try to sort of level out your contributions. So what you see is when we determine contributions, we're really kind of using the $7.8 million number. We don't have enough history to kind of show well how this works, but the idea is we recommend this for all clients, but it's not a mandatory thing to use, but we recommend contributions use some sort of smoothing just to avoid, us coming in 1 year at X and then having a great or poor return and coming in with a recommended contribution of Y and having that jump all over the place. Okay, so it should achieve some level of to avoid volatility in projected contributions. So with the assets, there's a 7.8 million. Let me jump to the funded status. So as of the current valuation, what you see here is these are also in thousands of dollars, about $17.1 million liability for the group, 7.8 million in assets, so unfunded liability of about $9.2 million. Which if you look at the ratio of the assets to the liability, that is about 46% funded as of the current valuation, okay? We have a slide here showing kind of historically where the plan has been. I'll try to give a little more perspective before we get to some contributions here, but this is the height of each bar is actual accrued liability as of the valuations going back to 2013. The light blue and dark blue is really the liability for retirees, and the green is the liability for active employees. So you can see, and then the red are the assets. So you can see there's the 46% funded as of the current valuation. You can see assets are not quite up to the level of the retiree liability, the end of the blue bar there, okay? If I jump back up real quickly, unfunded liability was 13.2 million in the previous study. We calculate to be 9.2 million in the current. We're also projecting when we get to determine your 22-23 recommended contributions, we're projecting that unfunded liability to drop a little further down to about $8.8 million. So roughly a $9 million unfunded liability. So how does that translate to recommended contributions? Well, here it is. So we recommend about a $1.3 million overall contribution for fiscal year 21-22. And this valuation covers 2 years, so about the same number, but a little higher for the next year. So built into that is there's really two components real quickly. The recommended contribution is a normal cost, which is a cost of benefits accruing for active employees. Plus you have an amortization payment on that unfunded liability, that roughly $9 million number. In this case, the schedule is to pay off that unfunded liability over 20 years. Like it's at $578,000 annual payment, gets you a total of $1.3 million, okay? So this is not, we talked about what is being funded with the $750,000 per year. This is kind of independent of that, right? That policy was set into place. What we're saying is, look, here's a recommended amount to keep the plan sufficient over a long period of time, and that recommendation would be 1.3 million. there's nothing, written in stone here. This, would 1.3 million be reasonable? Yes. Would something more, something less, probably still keep the plan sufficient? Absolutely. Okay, so it's a recommended. Think of it kind of as a kind of benchmark, and certainly a recommendation on contributions. But to the extent you wanted to pre-fund quicker, that certainly would be a reasonable and encouraged thing to do. If you look forward, then, so we have the 1.3 million here as recommended for the year. Now let's jump forward to our projections on slide 30. So here is now a 10-year projection. And here are the actual determined contributions we were just looking at for the 2 years, about 1.3 million. Here in this column, they're projected out over 10 years. And the following columns here are what's the contribution policy? What are you contributing towards that? And you have the benefits paid to retirees, that portion of the Kaiser premium, the Medicare Part B. You have the implied subsidy credit, in this case, $129,000. You're then pre-funding, you put in $750,000 in the trust. So you're paying $1.5 million essentially to pay down this liability over time. So it's actually higher, $200,000 higher than the actual determined contribution. So you really have just accelerated the schedule to pay off that unfunded liability. As you might recall, I mentioned that's being paid off over 20 years. What you see here is actually under this policy, you pay it off over a shorter period. And just look real quick. Yeah, I don't have the exact period. I thought maybe we had a projection, but we don't. But at any rate, you're paying it off over probably 15 years, something like that, rather than 20 years through this policy of contributing $750,000 per year.
So I have a question for you, Doug.
Yeah.
You showed it was the inverse of unfunded. It was the percentage of liability that was funded, and it had increased pretty significantly since the library had begun making these additional payments. I think it was actually a chart, but it showed, yeah, 46%. Fine, yeah. So my question is, if as we look out, assuming that we continue to make the $750,000 additional payments that we've committed to, when we reach the end of that period, which I think is 2027, 28, what percentage of our accrued liability will have been funded?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. It's something we could put together easily, but I don't have that number off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay. But I not to belabor the obvious, but I'm assuming that we want that number to be as close to 100% as possible, and that to see it at 3 or 8% is a disaster.
Yeah. So let me come back to this page here. So right, the $750,000 is scheduled to continue to the trust through 2028. At that point in time, what you see here is the ADC, the recommended contribution is then 1.3 million still, right? It's about the same number, right? So at the end of that period, after the last payment of $750,000 goes into the trust, to continue on the 20-year horizon to pay off the unfunded liability would mean that 750 drops down to 186 per year.
Okay, so we're making, in addition, besides the kind of the payment of current benefits, we're making an additional contribution, but much lower than we're doing during this catch-up period.
Much lower, the additional contribution.
Well, instead of 750, it's 186.
Oh, I see. At that point in time, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm gonna conclude from this, and Barbara, I'm gonna salute you because I know you were here, but it seems as though this was a good course correction that we made, and seems to have put us on a much better track. Tom, you got a hand up. question.
Well, I going back a ways, I got confused. And when we got to this 30, I think what you're saying is when we were looking at 24, I was thinking you were saying the 750 isn't enough to pay because you were recommending 1,300,000 or 1.3 million or whatever.
Right.
But I think what you're saying now, after looking at this, is that as long as we pay 750, we're continuing to pay down, and we have a 15-year window. And potentially, if we kept the 750 going for a longer period of time, we'd get down much lower more quickly.
That's right. And I may have just said that backwards, but what I was meaning to say in the earlier slide was that with the 750, you're paying more than the 20-year payment.
Right.
Yeah.
That you guys had calculated a payment to kind of smooth things out over a 20-year period, but in fact, we're paying more than that.
That's right.
Got it. Okay.
That's right. Yep.
And so we could potentially make a policy at this time to continue the 750 at the 750 rate longer than 27, 28 year.
You certainly could, yes.
Is that something you would consider reasonable? I'm not saying you recommend, I'm just saying, would that be reasonable?
Well, so it would be reasonable. I would certainly, look, we recommend agencies pre-fund, and we recommend, that they pre-fund over a reasonable period of time, which you're doing both, right? So we would recommend you pre-fund, but what I strongly recommend is that you understand and would want to and recognize that there's going to be pre-funding after that 750, right? That you're going to have this 186. I think 750 is fine. I think if you were intending to continue the pre-funding after that point, which is the most important thing to me, I guess I would say. That makes sense.
Okay, we could be pre-fund at a different level, but we need to continue to pre-fund.
Right.
Pay extra is the way I look at it.
Right.
Yeah. Barbara, you've got a hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that when we had the separate OPEB committee and looked at this, we were very much this was very much because Measure Y had passed. Not that we were using Measure Y money for this, that we were in such a better financial situation. And that's why we did the policy out 10 years, which is actually 10 years is actually slightly beyond the life of Measure Y. But anyway, that was actually as far as the committee, who included some actuarials and also a city manager and some other folks. But that's as far as they felt we should go out with that extra 750, because that was how long we knew the tax measure was going to be in place. Again, not using Measure Y money for it, but just being in a much healthier situation. And I think the question that Andy asked earlier, which is interesting to me, is at what point are we going to have that, be in the, close to 100% fully funded? I mean, what year would that be if we just do 750 and then go to this lesser amount, which is still a significant contribution? When are we in fully funded territory? I'm kind of, wondering this after watching that, the Calpers webinar that Andy recommended that we watch. I mean, again, the goal would be to, be totally funded. So I don't know if you can get us that date at some point in time, but I did want to just remind everybody about why we went out 10 years, why it's like that. And again, also prepaid $3 million, which really did bring it down a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Barbara, and I want to thank you again, because I know you were instrumental on that committee. And I'm very happy that we're reviewing this now and not seeing the situation as we were several years ago. Doug, in the interest of time, I feel like the pension discussion is, if anything, going to be even more complex. And so I'm wondering if we should maybe pivot, or any final. Let me see if I can summarize this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it seems like when the library decided several years ago to make those additional contributions and to continue at a rate of $750,000 a year through 27, 28, we put ourselves on a much more sustainable track. We have made improvement over the last years. Your analysis projects that we will, if we stay on that path, we will continue to improve and will significantly close the gap between our liabilities and what's been funded. Not to say we shouldn't continue to look at this going forward, but what I take away from this is quite reassuring that we seem to be on a path to correct a pretty big deficit situation within the next 6 to 7 years. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the other thing, because we've kind of come back to this with the Calpers, so I'll mention it here, is a lot of agency ask about unfunded liabilities and where should they be concerned? Is it too big, or is it a problem? The fact of the matter is that in a lot of ways, while the unfunded liability is something you should consider and look at, I'm not suggesting you ignore it, but what it is to me is far more important is really what we're looking at here is this is the projection of what it is expected to cost to pay off that unfunded liability. So to the extent you're comfortable making these payments in the future, you're going to take care of the unfunded liability. And whether the unfunded liability is $3 million or $30 million almost becomes a moot point. I know it's not, it's built into these numbers, but what's most important is, are these reasonable sort of financial cash outlays that can be made?
Right. No, that's and I do want to look at that in relation to the pension situation too. And I understand that there's what I'm taking from what you're saying is that there's not necessarily a specific rule of thumb that says X percentage of unfunded liabilities is bad versus Y is good. Clearly, you need to look at not just the percentage, but the total dollar amount of the gap.
Right.
And I think, I'll just say that as commissioners, I feel we have a responsibility to not just kick the can down the road and, take a serious situation, but put it off and say, well, we'll let another set of commissioners deal with that. We want to be on a sustainable path and something that we feel comfortable about so that we can attest to the long-term financial stability of the library.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, if it's okay, then can you shift gears for us and take us through the pension situation, Doug? It's very helpful.
Well,
I appreciate it.
I would ask Mr. Pryor, we've got about 30 or 40 more slides here. Is there anything you want to cover in this healthcare thing? Is there something else you need to say before we just skip it?
No, I think we've covered the key points. As it was mentioned early on, there's a ton of detail in the report.
That's
but yes,
fine
I
with
think
me.
okay.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so with that, then I'll move on to the Calpers analysis. Maybe a little bit more background on this in terms of what the heck is going on here, right? You were just looking at the Opeb valuation report that was prepared by our firm. And that was a June 30, 2021 valuation. For Calpers has their own actuaries. They issue valuation reports every year. But for example, this report, this analysis we're preparing is based on a June 30, 2020 valuation by Calpers. And that was released sometime in the second half of last year. So this is, while it's more out of date in some respects, certainly in that it's June 30, 2020, one of the things we do in our analysis is that we project this information forward so that you can have not just the unfunded liabilities as of June 30, 2021, but also where we expect your contributions to go far out into the future, okay? So again, a lot of information in this report. I'm going to try to jump through some of the more important slides or information here. This has historical investment returns from Calpers. So the green is the annual rate of return Calpers has achieved going back to 1996. As you're probably aware, they had quite a good return in 2021 at 21.3%. Didn't highlight that so well. You know, they have actually done fairly well in the recent years. And what probably is more important is, you know, if you look at this box here, if you go back over 20 years, they've averaged about 6.9%. And over the last 30 years, about 8.3%. Okay, so they've performed, especially in the last several years, quite well, and in fact, kind of above the expected returns that they've assumed in general.
Doug, one quick question for you. You pointed out that they had a very good return in 21, but all of their actuarial data is actually based on June 30 of 2020. So,
right.
So now I realize you're going to project that forward for us a little bit, but what we see from Calpers is actually not as favorable as if it were more updated.
Right, and part of what this analysis is providing you is not only do we include the impact of the 21% return, but also since Calpers issued this June 30, 20 valuation report, they've decreased their discount rate from 7% down to 6.8. So we've included that too. So you have much better, more up-to-date information within this report.
Great.
Okay. So let me jump forward just to mention benefits. We mentioned benefits on Opeb. This chart may be a little busy, but let me explain what this is. Calpers benefit formulas provide a percent of pay for each year of service, right? And what you have here across the x-axis are ages, and then what's being graphed here are the various percent of pay formulas in the Calpers universe. And what you have are the gray lines are those that were out there in the universe. The library doesn't have. Library has the two red lines. So the red lines are the 2 at 55 formula, and then the Pepper 2 at 62. So one of the things you see here, so if you just look at this big picture, you have, you know, 2 of the 3 lower formulas available with your final tier, which is, you know, standard across the state now, the Pepper formula here, right? But what you see is, you know, in terms of, you know, are your Calpers costs higher than most in the state? I would say no, right? And the reason is you're not up here at the 2.7 at 55 formula or 2.5 at 55 formulas a lot of agencies have, okay? So let me jump forward so we can get to everything. I need to talk a little bit about kind of a technical issue here. This may be the cousin to the implied subsidy for Calpers, is the risk mitigation strategy that Calpers has. So what they did a number of years, 5 or so years ago, was they looked at their portfolio and they said, you know what, we should not be so aggressively invested. We've got a lot of retirees out there. You might draw the analogy to a 401k plan, although certainly it's a little different, but a 401k plan for someone that's age 70 should probably invest a lot more conservatively than a 20-year-old should, right? So Calpers said, yeah, we're too aggressive. We need to move to a more conservative portfolio. But the problem was, in doing that, they would have to reduce the discount rate and costs would have soared across the state. So they came up with this thing called the risk mitigation policy. The risk mitigation policy is doing is just saying, let's wait for years where there are really good returns. And in those years, we'll essentially use half of the investment gains to lower the discount rate and lower the investment risk. So the idea would be, suppose an agency had a 20% contribution rate. Calpers has a great year with a huge return, and the contribution would have dropped from 20% of pay down to 18% of pay. What Calpers in that year would do is say, okay, we're going to move more to fixed income. We're going to reduce the discount rate, And instead of having your contribution be 18% of pay, it's going to be 19% of pay. So there'll be good news in those years with great returns. It just won't be as good as it would have been before. They're not on a fixed schedule at all. So it's not as though you can say, okay, next year they're going to be, this year they're at 6.8, next year they'll be at 6.7. You know, it's going to depend on where returns are in the future. So we've done some modeling on this. And what you see here is the thick green line are basically the expected returns due to risk mitigation in future years. Now, as I mentioned, they're not on a fixed schedule. So what we're saying here is based on our stochastic modeling of likely ranges of returns, that in say 2030 here, the discount rate might be as low as 6.2, might be as high as 6.5%. Half the time you'd be somewhere in that range, but it's to sort of emphasize the idea that while we expect you to be somewhere around this thick green line, it's going to vary in the future depending on investment returns. You may be, you know, kind of at the high or the low here. Okay, so that's going to need to make sure that everyone knows that when you look at projections later, we're not assuming CalPERS gets the 6.8 going forward. We're actually going to assume essentially that you're kind of on this green path, and that ultimately, basically 20 years from now, CalPERS will be invested to earn and will earn in the long term 6% from that point forward. Okay. Let me then, you know, we did talk a little bit about the Opeb investment portfolio. So maybe I won't talk about this, but just for reference, slide 14 has how CalPERS is investing your pension money. And the two columns are really the where their investment policy before the November meeting, and the second column here is the investment policy that they adopted after the meeting, which includes this leveraging of the portfolio a little bit, about 5%. Okay, so I probably, for the sake of time, I won't talk more, but it's just for a reference point so that you know that's in the document if you want to refer to it. So let's move on to the data real quick. 214 employees in the valuation by CalPERS. You have 195 that are receiving a benefit. You have another 52 plus 15 former library employees that are now that are no longer with the library, but are due a benefit in the future. As you can see here, the average benefit being paid to your current retirees is a little under $21,000 per year. That's the library portion of the retiree benefits. So I want to kind of quickly touch big picture on data and whatnot. So let's move forward now to the funded status. So this graphic is a little bit busy, but let me explain. We really have our 2019 here, 2020, and then finally over here, our projection of, these are all June 30, 2021. And within each section, what we have is the actuarial, the accrued liability, and assets. And the box there is showing the unfunded liability, right? So the 2 years, 2019, 2020, are exactly as shown in the CalPERS reports. So what you see is, as of June 30, 19, there was a $14 million unfunded liability. As of June 30, 20, it had grown to 16 million. So the return actually between June 30, 19 and 20 was a little below their expectation. Of course, as we mentioned, the June 30, 21 return was quite good, right? And so that unfunded liability has now dropped to about $7 million, okay? And so where does that lead you with in terms of where contributions are expected to go? Let me flip down to this here, our projection. I should maybe make this a little bigger. It's probably a little better. So I want to start off with this because it gets a little bit to risk and perhaps what could happen in the future a bit. What you see here is the blue line here is where we would project contributions to be as a percent of payroll out into the future. If CalPERS had earned 7% for the year ending June 30, 2021. And the green line here is where we project contributions to be now that they've earned the 21%. Okay, so you can see what a dramatic impact that has had on things, that 1 year return. So I think it's good for to understand that impact, and also, you know, to consider that just as easy as it dropped, it could go back up again, right? And especially with what's happening in the markets right now and the crisis in Ukraine. You know, what we have in these projections, we've included the return through June 30, 2021. After that, we've assumed the expected return of 6.8%. We're probably within a month or so of having some more information from Calpers and maybe considering showing a lower return for fiscal year in 22 because it's not looking very good. So at any rate, this gives you an idea what a big deal that return was for 2021. We get a little bit to risk and contributions, or maybe volatility in contributions. So this graphic on this slide is similar to what you're looking at with respect to the risk mitigation. So real quickly, the thick green line is where we expect contributions to be as a percentage of payroll. And that's sort of if they achieve their return, which we're assuming to be about 6.8, grading down to 6% over about a 20-year period. And then what you see shooting up and down are kind of the kind of good and bad scenarios. What we're really saying is take this year 32, 33. We expect you to be at 18.7% of payroll for a contribution, but half the time due to investment volatility, you'd be somewhere between 27.7 and 11.4% of pay. So just going to depend on how returns are going forward. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, the previous slide, just as you have this big gain and things have are looking a lot better, there's obviously a chance it could pop back up and you could be back more up on path such as this. Okay. So that's where we expect the contributions to be in the future with the investment volatility. We kind of covered the funded status, as I said earlier, right? Although the numbers are lower here in terms of unfunded liability, what you do have is maybe that's not as important as looking at this projection here, and maybe not only is the thick green line affordable, but if it's, you know, a bit above there, as we're saying, there's a decent chance you could be on the higher end of what's shown here. Is that a feasible path down the road? That ultimately gets to is the benefit affordable? So with respect to all of this, the other thing, you know, this is in a nutshell, the bottom line to unfunded liability, where we expect contributions to be in the future. The other item that is kind of the main purpose of this document is way towards the end where we show the 115 trust scenario. So I may jump way down to try to get to that. Wait, let me page back up so we know what we're talking about here. So here, so basically we have illustrated what would things look like with additional $500,000 contribution to Calpers. And
can I stop you right there, Doug?
Yeah.
Just a second. So with the chart that you were showing us before, and I realize there's a, you know, you're showing kind of a higher limit and lower limit just to encompass a wide range of risk situations and different, you know, return scenarios. This contribution projection, is this calculated to eliminate the unfunded liability going 20 years out, or what is the basis of this number?
Yeah, so let me, because we have jumped over it, but let me, a few slides down, we have the unfunded liability projection. I think it will answer your question. So let me go to here. So this is the sort of not the mirror image, but sort of the corresponding numbers on the funded status.
The funded status. Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the difference, the previous one we're looking at was over a little over 10 years. This is going out 30 years. But what you see here is, yes, those contributions are essentially expected to pay off your unfunded liability, somewhere around June 2039. So a little less than 20 years.
20 years.
You're expected to pay off that unfunded liability.
Now, what this also shows, and again, I think it's dramatic, although it could swing the other way, is that our funded status went from 79% to 89% based on the exceptional returns of 1 year.
That's right.
I think that's great news, and it's sobering news.
Right. I think it's right. The same as, the original slide here, right?
Yeah.
Going from the blue to green, it's great news. It's also, as you're saying, sobering because, you could have back-to-back years that are poor and you go from the green back to the blue and then maybe above that, right? We just don't know.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. I didn't mean to derail you, but I wanted to
that's good.
just confirm that was on a track that was going to bring us to fully funded status roughly 18, 20 years out. Okay. So
That's
now
right.
I believe you're going to talk about what would happen if, as we did for Opeb, if we were to make some additional discretionary contributions for a period of time. Is that where you're?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so there's, in terms of additional contributions, you have, really kind of two ways to do this, right? You could give additional money to Calpers, right? Or you could give additional money to a 115 trust separate from Calpers. Now, the money of the 115 trust eventually would go to Calpers,
Right.
Long term, but and it is, like the Opeb trust, talk about the Opeb trust being only available to pay benefits for retirees. The 115 trust for Calpers can only be used to, send money to Calpers in the long term, right? Now, there are kind of some other details about that I could go into, but it's a little perhaps looser than that in terms of cash flow and reasons why, you've got a little bit more flexibility there. But nonetheless, that's the idea, right? The money in the 115 trust can only go to Calpers. When you give additional money to Calpers is going to say, in this case, the illustration saying $500,000 to Calpers. Calpers is going to say, oh, we have more money now, so we're not going to charge you as much on the unfunded liability. We have all these schedules of basis set up to pay off your unfunded liability. You need to let us know which one to pay off. And so you then can either select what, is a short base or a long base. So think of this as like a mortgage, right? And paying off a mortgage, if you have two mortgages, you have a short mortgage. If you pay that one off, you're probably going to, assuming they're similar dollar amounts, the short mortgage payoff is going to reduce your cash, have the biggest impact on your cash flow. But paying off the long base is going to have the longest, it's going to have the biggest impact long term on your savings, right? And so the long story short here is really that the green, and this is, I admit, this is an extremely busy chart, but the thick green that kind of disappears, but is in the background, is where we project your contributions to be in the future. And then what you have is the red and dashed blue are where the contributions would expect to be to Calpers with either the $500,000 paid and then applied to either in the red line is a short base and the dash blue is the long base. So the point here really is that what you see maybe after this point in time is there's not really much difference. And the point here is that if you give the money to Calpers, you're back to the same sort of schedule you were in the beginning, just a little bit lower, but you've got the same volatility going on. You've got the same sort of roller coaster you're on. Right. And so that's if you give the money to Calpers. So the other way to do this, as I mentioned, give the money to a 115 trust. And this is kind of how most agencies look at this. So is the green here, or where we project contributions to be, is the percent of pay without a 115 trust. You put $500,000 in the 115 trust, and you move over to the orange line, which kind of gets buried here for a while. It's behind the green, and then it kind of reemerges here. But the sort of motivation in general for the 115 trust has been to put in money so that you can sort of shave off these high years, and you shave off the high years by doing the following. You put the $500,000 in, you let it sit there, and then when you get to this year and your contribution goes up to 18.2% of pay, you give CalPERS 17.2% of pay, and then you take that other 0.5% of pay from the 115 trust, you transfer it over to CalPERS. So CalPERS, from their perspective, they still get the money that's indicated, or the contributions that are on the green line here, but the library's net cost for pension is the orange line. So you've avoided these years with these higher rates. Now, I got to also say that, you know, we've been doing these projections for years, and, you know, when the green lines were, you know, starting at say 21% and escalating to 30%, and then coming back down over this period, there's a lot stronger argument for doing a 115 trust to shave off that peak. If you look at the green right now, you know, right, if you're at 21% of payroll, and what's happening here is that you're avoiding getting above, you know, 17.7% of payroll, right? So you're shaving off a peak, but it's even a lower peak than you're at now. So what we have been looking to develop, haven't done yet, is that this is, again, on an expected basis. So what it seems agencies are doing with the 115 trust is now starting to look at them a little more like a rainy day fund, meaning that the green is where we expect you to be. But if you recall some of those earlier charts, or that one specific one, that things could be ramping up here, right, at the higher rates. And so I think that's a stronger argument. It's still an argument to use a 115 trust, but I think a stronger argument than this is that this green line is just an expectation, and there's a good chance you're going to be below it or significantly above it. And to the extent you're above it, you can use the 115 trust to sort of level things out when those higher bills come from CalPERS.
So I have a question for you, Doug.
Yeah.
You've been talking about an additional $500,000 contribution. Are you talking about a one-time $500,000 contribution? Or are you talking about like the kind of thing we did with Opeb, where we say, you know what, we're going to make an additional contribution of $500,000 every year for X number of years?
Great question. I should have specified that. I think we're looking at a one-time $500,000 contribution here.
Barbara, I'm looking at your eyebrows, and I guess I'm thinking the same. It's like, it seems like what we did for Opeb was a very prudent step. Doug, as part of this analysis, did you do, or could you do a multi-year projection of, you know, suppose we were to commit to, you know, 6 years of additional contributions?
Absolutely, we could add that in.
Okay. And let me see if I'm clear on this as well, because we got a presentation by, and Barbara, I see you have your hand up. We got a presentation from CalPERS a number of months ago that was not timely. It was a little bit ahead of the fact, but it was a kind of a separate investment group within CalPERS that set up to receive additional discretionary payments, and their investment strategy is a little bit different. So it seemed like there's really two questions that we would want to ask ourselves. One is, do we want to make some additional discretionary payments of some amount over some period of time? And secondly, where's that money going to go? Is it going to go directly to CalPERS? Is it going to go to this other group within CalPERS that has a little different approach? Or is it going to go to a separate 115 trust? Are those, is that a reasonable way of encapsulating the two questions?
Yes, and let me, on the second one, so let's set aside the amount for now. But yeah, in terms of the you know where it goes, you have, as you're saying, the two options, CalPERS or 115 trust. CalPERS has a 115 trust.
Oh.
so it gets a little, so, and most agency, and CalPERS was late to the game on this. So most agencies for the 115 trust go with PARs and have gone with PARs. And, that's because CalPERS is late to the game for one, and two, I think there's a general, mistrust to CalPERS, and that agencies tend not to want to send them more money. I've had agencies say, why would we give them more money, right? So that ultimately this money is going to end up at CalPERS, but there's sort of two main trusts. There's other ways to other providers that have 115 trusts, but those are the two that kind of we're talking about now. Yeah.
Okay. And as you say that, I'm going to bet that the group that we heard from was the group that manages the 115 trust for CalPERS.
That's, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. We have questions first from Barbara and then from Tom. You're on mute, Barbara.
I think you guys were getting to where I was going with this. When I watched that webinar, I was really convinced about making additional discretionary payments because it seemed like a really good idea when you're in good shape like we are right now, pay some down. And so the point is, do you just do a clump, or do you do the next 5 years or something? Like I was referring to under OPEB, you do it as long as we know we have the Measure Y money for sure. You have some sort of horizon like that, but it didn't seem to be, I wasn't sure about this point about setting up the trust. I know that when you have a trust that you can do your own investment strategy, but it seemed like kind of a really easy thing to do, just to send it to CalPERS. But just there at the end of what you guys were talking about, it just sounded, I'm trying to get at why you don't want to just send the money to PERS. Is it because of their investment strategy or?
Yeah, so
it's such an easy way to go.
Yeah, I'm not convinced we wouldn't, Barbara, but Doug, I'll let you answer this, but it sounded like for some agencies, there's a suspicion, or they're saying, gee, we've got to already have a lot of money invested with them. Let's invest money with this other group. Doug, what would be your response?
Well, so I would say, look, if you're just looking to the route to lower your long-term costs, the best, then give the money to CalPERS, because honestly, we think long-term CalPERS is probably going to earn more than the 115 trust will, right? And so just do it that way and be done with it. Now, and we have some agencies that look at the 115 trust and say, yeah, thanks, but we're just going to send it on to CalPERS. The reason to do the 115 trust, I mean, you control the investments for one, right? So there's a small portion, I don't think it's very big, but some agencies that concerned about where the markets are going to go, saying, we're going to give money to CalPERS and let them have, in this portfolio that has a 5% leverage factor with their private equity and all this stuff, and they're concerned about that, right? The other reason, though, is really it's a budgeting mechanism to avoid, again, back to this chart here, this graphic, to be able to let the money sit there, and then to the extent things go bad, you have a way to avoid that. If you give the money to CalPERS, you're essentially just slightly lower, but on the same trajectory as the green line. Whereas the 115 trust gives you budgeting flexibility and the ability to sort of avoid, or mitigate, I suppose, the bad times.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
I want to talk about this graph, and my understanding, and this is just, you need to correct me if I'm wrong. The orange line is what I'm going to describe as the mess that CalPERS has created through overestimating their returns for several years. When we had bad returns, we got way behind. CalPERS is way behind. And now you have this high 25% of payroll that you're going to have to pay in to be covered. Am I wrong or right or what?
No, that's not it, Tom. This is a whole different situation. The orange line represents an additional, in this case, one-time contribution of $500,000.
Well, the green line. Let me. I'm sorry, the green line then. Because the green line is going from 21 to 10.5 is their goal over 20 years. And so that's their fix-it plan where they're reducing their rate of return, et cetera, being more realistic. So the green line is the expectation with their plan. Is that correct? If we don't do anything.
Yeah, but let me just add one thing to that. The fact that the green line is declining over time is actually a good thing. That's telling you that the unfunded liability is being paid down and paid off.
Well,
right?
that CalPERS said, we've screwed up, we got to fix this. So we're going to, it took a lot of pressure, but eventually they did, and they've got this plan, and that's it. So that's what the green line is.
I think it's more, Tom, I'm going to jump in here, and Doug, if you think this is wrong, just cut me off and say so. But I think what we're actually, there's a couple of things. One is the change in the retirement plans that was legislated back in, what was it, 2013? Was that PEPRA? You saw that previously the retirement plans were much more generous. And I think unrealistic in some cases. So there was that. And I think another factor, which is probably beyond our ability to get into in this committee, is changing demographics and the fact that the people who have earned more money will have already retired, and we're creating a more sustainable long-term system, but it's just taken a while to get there. Doug, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, the pepper is helping a lot. That's another reason for the decline over time, although it's probably not as big a factor as just the fact that you're paying down the unfunded liability, and that's, as I said, that's a good thing in itself, right? The fact that it's declining over time is, now this is just an expected basis, but it's telling you have a lot less. The fact that you have a 10.7% of payroll contribution here and it's 20% of payroll here means that your unfunded liability has significantly been reduced when you get out here.
Okay.
And the volatility here has really, in terms of, ideally it would be a flat line, but you also keep in mind that once you pay off that unfunded liability, you still have that normal cost payment. So even if you could flatten this out more, but ultimately, that doesn't eliminate volatility anyway, because you can flatten it out in terms of how you amortize the liability, but you're still going to be subject to investment volatility.
Right. Very much appreciate the presentation. I know we could take a lot more time, but we do have some other agenda items. I'm going to ask the same question that Tom asked before. Are there any major parts of the analysis, Doug, that we haven't touched on and that you would want to be sure we do look at with you?
No, I think we covered the highlights and key points here.
I'll see, Barbara, I see you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I would just like, if not today, because obviously we have a lot to look at today, but I was curious about the Fresh Start, having listened again to that webinar where who talked about all the different basis levels, and that you can start fresh and amortize, change the amortization period. And this, I'm just wondering how we can look at that, or have, Mira look at that as an option, again, taking in the life of Measure Y, and, doing this as best we can, especially in a kind of a short time frame, just kind of under just a consideration under that. So I was curious about the Fresh Start, and perhaps there can be more conversation between Mira and Doug, just to give us some more information about that.
Yeah, so real quickly with respect to the Fresh Start, I would encourage you and agencies to develop their own policy in terms of how you want to pay down the unfunded liability, right? We do not recommend agencies go to CalPERS and request a Fresh Start. And the reason is because there's no undoing that Fresh Start. If you go to CalPERS and you say, we want to pay off the unfunded liability in 15 years, the CalPERS turns around and has 2 years with -5% returns, and your contributions skyrocket, you can't go back. Oh, wait, we want to go back to the other schedule. You're stuck with that, and you're stuck with the escalating rate. So you should, we recommend you develop, we could tell you, here's how much it would be to pay off the unfunded liability over X years. And then you have that rate and basically budget along that line, that trajectory, rather than having CalPERS, put it into stone where you have no flexibility.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've got a lot of additional work we need to do, but Doug, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the committee and the library for the work that you and your firm have done. And I think we'll communicate with you through Myrna.
Great, I enjoyed it. A lot of good questions, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to stop screen sharing. That's why I'm like staring at my screen back. I suppose someone will be able to just kick me off here, right? That will. So
let's see. Okay, we're going to.
It's usually near the top of your screen if you run your cursor along the top, perhaps, or at the bottom.
Yeah. Sorry, really was not my intent to hijack this meeting. Let me I lost my bar though.
It's okay. You could also you could leave the meeting at this. Oh,
there. Okay, there I am. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Okay. Wow. Okay, we're gonna move on to agenda item 4.3, and this is just an update on fund balances committed to capital improvement maintenance. So we had talked about establishing this fund. Myrna, where are we with this?
So this item is part of the budget process. So we kicked off the fiscal year 2023 budget process. We've been into it for a month now, and so we're well on our way to fully utilizing the Commission's fund balance policy to update the capital fund as well as the capital improvement maintenance. So we'll cover essentially vehicle replacement and IT infrastructure systems, our backbone to the library, so that we are funded in those areas and utilizing how those sections of the fund balance policy.
So do you expect that as part of the current budget cycle, we'll start to see specific funds committed to capital maintenance?
Yes, that is the best practice, so that it's a strategy to set aside funds a little bit at a time, so that when a major expenditure is needed, it's planned, the funding is available, rather than waiting to budget, $500,000 for your IT infrastructure, and you may not have it at that point.
Right.
Who knows what might happen? So this is a good fiscal prudent strategy.
Well, and is this is moving apace then as part of the work that you and your team are doing with the division managers on budget preparation?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions on this particular item? Okay, let's enlarge the discussion then. We'll move to item 4.4. And this is just an update on planning for the April 1 budget workshop. So this would be Myrna, you and Ann on this. How is it going?
Like I said, we kicked off the budget process, and we will have budget packet for you in advance with some time to review it, digest it, and be ready for the April 1 workshop. We're excited about it. We'll have new things presented to you, and you'll have a preview, somewhat of a preview in your March commission meeting. But we're well on our way.
Okay, Ann, I see you smiling. Anything you want to add to what Myrna just shared? No.
I think that you're going to be very pleased. The process that Myrna has outlined is really well orchestrated and very, very, very tight, and it's good.
Well, good. I'm very much glad to hear that. And now I realize that the next item on the agenda plays a key role in the budget discussion. So I'd like to get there, but any questions on 4.4 before we take another look at the allocation of major revenue sources policy? Okay, I'm going to suggest that we go to item 4.5. Now, Jan, I'm going to need a little guidance here. It doesn't come up that often, but I know that we have written comments that we have received that are supposed to be presented, and we need to have an opportunity for oral comments. What's the right sequence here? Should we allow Myrna to present the policy and then take the public comments?
Yes, I would recommend that Myrna do her presentation first.
Okay, we're going to go ahead.
Can you present the slides?
Certainly.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Finance Committee and the entire commission for taking on additional policies that address your fiduciary responsibility and providing clarity for the commission, the patrons, the voters, and staff. So with that, staff has developed an allocation of major revenue sources policy for your consideration. The two major revenue sources are property tax and Measure Y sales tax. Next slide. And the commission again requested that staff formalize a policy for allocating expenditures to Measure Y. This policy addresses a couple of purposes. One, the two requirements of the Measure Y ordinance, and provides transparency, clarity, and consistency for the use of major revenue funds. It also creates efficiencies for this work for the library staff. Next slide. The two requirements under Measure Y ordinance are: one, that Measure Y funds supplement existing funds. It expressly states that the Measure Y is to supplement existing library funds and not supplant those funds. Second is to meet the expenditure plan. The Measure Y states that sales tax revenues are to be used for the services and projects enumerated in the expenditure plan. Next slide. So to ensure that Measure Y supplements existing funds, a baseline is established with property tax expenditure levels prior to the enactment of Measure Y. And the last year that the library was funded solely with property taxes was fiscal year 15-16. Next slide. So The baseline then is established as fiscal year 15-16, and the total expenses for this year was $16,658,991. And the policy states that projects and services will continue to be funded by property tax at no less than the baseline level established in 15-16, as long as the measure Y is in effect. Next slide. So in meeting the expenditure plan requirements, based on the language of the expenditure plan, Measure Y can supplement funding in libraries, in all library service divisions. Specifically, the expenditure plan has 3 sections listed here, A, B, and C. And under each of these, there's a further detail of the projects that can be funded with Measure Y funds. Okay, next slide. In addition, the policy establishes allocation ratios. And for the service-oriented divisions, property tax and Measure Y tax, sales tax, shall be allocated as a proportion of total revenue. And this ratio has historically been within the following ranges of 55% to 67% for property tax and 33% to 45% for Measure Y. And at the time that the budget is developed, the chief financial officer or I determine these ratios consistent with revenue. And these ratios are presented to the commission during the annual budget workshop. And in particular, these ratios are applied to all expenditures under the service-oriented divisions for the duration of the fiscal year. Next slide. Therefore, Measure Y funds are proposed to be allocated according to this summary table. For service-oriented divisions, I expect that property tax will pay the majority of the expenditures. And so it will be allocated in this fashion. For administrative divisions, it is a clear ratio that does not change. It will always be 90% expenditures allocated to property tax and 10% to Measure Y. And for capital projects, the Measure Y does target capital projects for maintaining and enhancing facilities, and therefore a range has been set from 10% property tax up to 90% Measure Y. Next slide. The library has already, with all of its accounting procedures, internal controls. So the same internal controls will be applied to monitoring this policy. The Sonoma County Library has in place these controls that follow the generally accepted accounting principles. And importantly is the separation of duties for proper review and control. So, for example, the clerk that enters the payment for an invoice would follow the policy. And then there's a second level of review by the accountant before these payments have final approval in the financial system for payment. And these payments have regular review by accounting staff and the chief financial officer for quality and accuracy. The Second level of review is the Finance Committee and the Commission. The Chief Financial Officer presents financial reports with expenditures by fund and account for regular review, such as you reviewed earlier today in the Finance Committee. And these reports are reviewed and discussed at the regular Public Finance Committee and the Commission meetings. And then there's the third level of review by the Measure Y Oversight Committee. The Chief Financial Officer provides financial reports with Measure Y expenditures by account to the Oversight Committee. And these reports are reviewed and discussed at the scheduled meetings, and the next Measure Y Oversight Committee is scheduled tomorrow, March 1st. And they will be reviewing the financial reports through January, the same ones that you have today. And the Oversight Committee also issues its annual report. So these are the three levels of review and control to ensure that the policy is in place and that the intent of Measure Y is met by the library. Next slide. So in summary, the intent of the proposed policy is to meet the two Measure Y requirements. That Measure Y supplements property tax by establishing a baseline. And in addition, the policy establishes that library expenditures under Measure Y and property tax for each division are allocated appropriately for the services and projects in the expenditure plan. And this is further detailed in attachment 1, a matrix that describes the services of each division and aligns those services with the expenditure plan under the Measure Y ordinance. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. Oh, but also there's comments, so I don't know if you want to take those comments or questions first.
Myrna, I'd like to make a comment. I'd like to first of all thank you and your team for, I know this is in response to the earlier discussion that we had, but I'm very impressed with the clarity of the presentation, the thoughtfulness. I think this approach of establishing a baseline and then allocating by percentage is very reasonable. And I particularly like the supporting documentation that you put together. So I'm just going to use my prerogative as chair to comment. Barbara, I see that your hand is up, and I want to hear from everybody on this committee, but I think if it's okay with you, I'd like to hear the public comments first. And is that okay? And so first I'm going to ask if we have any members of the public who are on the call and would like to make a comment of up to 3 minutes. If you could please indicate by raising a hand. I'm not seeing any. Jen, are you aware of anybody listening in from the public who's looking to make a comment?
No, I don't see anyone present in the meeting looking to comment.
Okay, then before we hear from the members of the committee, I'm going to ask you, we do have some written comments, do we not?
Correct, I have 2 written comments.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to please read those into the record.
Okay, the first comment comes from Janice Brokaw. I appreciate the amount of effort required to provide us with a document that specifically spells out the breakdown of expenditures between property tax and Measure Y funds. In previous years, I believe a breakdown of 67% property tax to 33% sales tax was used only for materials and collections. However, I am concerned that this breakdown will be applied to all expenses within a category without regard to whether an expense complies with Measure Y guidelines. The Oversight Committee will continue to review all expenses for the compliance with Measure Y criteria and notify the Finance Committee when discrepancies are found. In previous years, the breakdown for materials and collections was done at the end of the fiscal year. I hope that quarterly reports will reflect this breakdown as we move forward. This will allow the Oversight Committee to stay on top of expenditures throughout the year. Sincerely, Janice Brokaw, Chair of the Measure Y Oversight Committee. The second comment comes from Mike Neely. Comments on the recommended policy. 1, it is a very good idea to have a firm policy based on the 2015-16 baseline expenditures. 2, the policy is focused on the divisions. The committee typically reviews expenditures based on the type of expense, such as salaries and benefits, services and supplies, with materials and programs separated, and capital projects. Particularly in services and supplies, it would be preferable to have a fixed percentage for everything except materials and programs, if those can be separated from special departmental expenses. That would avoid the situation of last year where the ratio varied from 0% to 99.6%. See the attached spreadsheet. It is hard to understand why the ratios would be different for different cost centers in services and supplies. A larger percentage can be used for materials and programs if separated, because those are specifically mentioned in the expenditure plan. 3, focusing on divisions brings up the issue of fund development. That is a useful and necessary function for the library, but the committee has raised issues of funding it through Measure Y in the past. Signed, Mike Neely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jen. So I'm going to open it up for discussion. Barbara, you've been very patient. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciated hearing those comments from the Measure Y committee. I applaud Myrna for this presentation, for putting it together, and again, a long time waiting, and I think you put a lot of put it in a rational context, and it's wonderful, and I really appreciate it. When you and I talked, you were going to break down the facilities and give us a few more line items under facilities in that 2016, that the matrix that showed the expenditures. I wondered if at some point in time you could do that for us.
Sure, Commissioner McKenzie, I can address that now. I had already looked at the breakdown of the facilities, and since our conversation, I wanted to go back and review them again just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And essentially, the facilities budget did not include it's capital expenditures.
Okay.
So there was very little being charged. Well, what I could say, it was basically staffing that was being charged at that time in to facilities. Our current drivers that moved books around from one branch to the other were designated under facilities, as well as the maintenance staff under facilities. So essentially it was routine maintenance that was budgeted in under facilities. And so you go back in our financial systems, and there are no true capital expenditures for projects in that fiscal year.
Okay, so to the point, before Measure Y, we were not able to invest in anything, and Measure Y targets, the facilities. So, the upgrading of our facilities. So I'm not sure about our proportion that, you're spelling on the policy about that.
I'm sorry, Barbara, when you say you're not sure,
it's back to that. It's just back to that point, like we were not spending any money on capital projects before we had Measure Y. And under the allocation schedule, which I don't really have, I guess it's at page 89, shows again that under a new, this allocation schedule, we still be spending 10 to 67% on out of property tax for capital projects. And then then there's that number 90 to 33%, which is backwards. I'm just a little unclear about how that connects. When we basically had no budget at all for capital projects before Measure Y.
Well, I'm going to jump in with a comment, and then Myrna, please elaborate or correct what I'm saying. Given the fact that, well, a couple of things. Clearly, there's no limit on how much property tax we can put towards something, right? So, I mean, if we wanted to put 100% of a capital project against property tax, there's nothing in the Measure Y language that would prevent us from doing that. Now, that said, because there was little or nothing that was going to capital projects, it seems to me we could easily make a case to put 100% of a project against sales tax, because the baseline was essentially zero. What Myrna's done is not quite that severe. It's basically that we could put up to 90% against Measure Y and only 10% against property tax. And there's flexibility if we want to go higher with the percentage of property tax. But to me, the fact that there's a potentially high allocation to Measure Y revenue is a reflection of exactly what you said, that there was little or nothing that was previously going toward any kind of capital projects. Myrna, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think we're trying to also just reflect that property tax can contribute to every division and project as well, and that it is in a situation that it can do that in these days, and it is because of Measure Y as well. So we were trying to accommodate for that. It is the desire of the commission as to where these numbers would land, but our recommendation was that property tax could contribute to these capital projects.
Okay. Well, I just thought it was kind of a strange percentage allocation there, and this is to give you guidelines so as you're doing our budget, and so I guess. Well, anyway, I'll have to see how it plays out, but that was
Sure. Well, I could say is that, for example, currently property tax out of the over $6 million budget for capital, only 1,000 is allocated to property tax. So there is some precedent here that over time, since that fiscal year 15-16, some property tax has funded some capital, and so it would be a very small fraction in the scheme of things if we were to use 10% for property tax paying into the capital projects.
Okay, well, let me just ask one more question. We're given the hour, but this is an important one. You're going to be setting these allocations as you do the budget based on revenue that we've already gotten in the prior year. So will you be adjusting as the year ends and we see the true amounts of money coming in? Will you be adjusting after we see, the real revenue?
Well, maybe there needs to be a little bit of clarity there, is that the way I would be allocating is what the expected revenue is for the budget year. So every year that we're developing the budget, so currently we're developing the fiscal year 2023 budget. And we do analysis of what we expect revenue to come in at. So for example, with property tax, I work with the county controller, auditor controller's office to determine what their projection is for property tax in fiscal year 2023. And the same kind of analysis is done for the sales tax. And so looking at what we're projecting for fiscal year 2023, property tax and sales tax, looking at that ratio for that specific fiscal year. So I wouldn't be looking back. I would be looking into that current fiscal year so that it's all contained within that fiscal year.
But then would you compare it with actuals and make adjustments if you need to at the end of the year?
We could do that, but we could do that if that is the desire of the commission. It is to be more consistent in terms of how the budget was adopted. So therefore we're applying the ratio consistently throughout the year. I believe that with anything, that's what the mid-year point is, to evaluate how revenues are coming in, how expenditures are coming in, so that we can evaluate changes to the budget at that time. And normally agencies can make adjustments to their budget if there are activities, the economy or some natural disaster that is having an impact on revenue or on operations. So there is always that room to do that.
Well, I was just kind of looking at this through the eyes of the Measure Y committee and, making sure that I don't know how, fixed and hard and fast this is going to be. So, what we project is not necessarily what we'll get in, in a proportional way. So I don't know. It's a little unfixed to me, but I feel really rushed. This particular agenda had, 3 gigantic things on it that we've waited a long time for. And, there are a lot of, it's complicated and, we've been at it for over 2 hours. So I don't know. I don't feel, quite done with this. And I know we're going to need to adopt this and make a recommendation. But anyway, it's a little frustrating because I feel like I'm particularly hurrying, but I don't know. Anyway, that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Yes, Mayor, and I want to congratulate you on this policy. I think it's a brilliant achievement. The idea of flexible percentages set each year is something that really deserves a gold star. And it allows us, to realize that we're not setting fixed percentages forever. These are annual percentages. I have one conceptual question here. The actual policy says it speaks of historic ratios have been within the following ranges: property tax 55 to 67, Measure Y 33 to 45. You've basically used these same historical percentages as benchmarks for going forward. Is this a hard link or is it a soft link? For example, could we expand your discretion by making larger ranges here?
Well, the policy states that the 2 major sources, property tax and Measure Y tax, shall be allocated as a proportion of total revenue. And I guess I could clarify that for the budget year, right? So we're talking about for that. So for example, for fiscal year 2023, I'm not expecting right now, I haven't finalized revenue projections haven't been finalized. But let's state it's the same, it's going to be approximately the same as this current fiscal year. So this current fiscal year, it's about a 60-40 split. But it will be it will be based on the ratio of the proportion of each of sales tax and property tax. So this is just a statement that the ratio has historically been this. I expect it to continue to be within this range. It is a broad range, but the ratio will be dependent on the budget, the budgeted numbers.
Okay, let me try again. There's no reasoning set forth as to why you have adopted these historic ranges for the ranges for your budgets in years to come. If you're happy with the historic ranges, then fine. If you feel you might need more discretion, that would also be fine. But in any case, I'm prepared to move ahead immediately with this. There are a couple of typos and wordos that I won't delay us with. I'll send you an email about them, but I think this is a stunning achievement, and I'm prepared to vote for it at the March 7th commission meeting if it gets there.
Dave, thank you. And I'm going to jump in and just say that I understand your question. And in fact, at my request, Myrna did expand the ranges somewhat. So when we looked at historically what was the proportion between property tax and sales tax, the proportion did not actually change as much over the past years. We broadened the range a little bit at the top and the bottom so that she would have more flexibility if, for example, property tax were to increase next year a little more than has historically been the case, or vice versa.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Tom.
We had two comments from Measure Y members. They're having a meeting tomorrow. Has the entire committee considered this proposal as drafted as we're receiving it?
I believe that Myrna's presenting it tomorrow to the Measure Y committee. Isn't that the fact, Myrna?
Well, the oversight committee was provided a draft, a copy of this policy. On March 10th, I believe it was, and we asked them to submit comments by February 10th, and we asked them to submit comments by February 15th. And the comments that were read out loud today were the ones that we received. So that's one opportunity. The second opportunity is tomorrow, where I present this policy to the entire oversight committee at their scheduled meeting.
They were also invited to attend this meeting as well.
Well, my attitude is we're trying to do something that's very, very difficult because of the loosey-goosey language that was put into the proposition, the ballot measure to try to get people to vote for it, to make them feel good. If it's okay with the Measure Y committee, I'm happy with it. I don't know that there's any real fixed, easy to define way to work this out. So that's one thing I'm going to say. It's just very loose language that we're dealing with, and we need to try to always keep that in mind when we're budgeting. Those it's got to be new stuff kind of thing. That's all I have to say. I'm okay with it. I think it's gotten better as it's gone through drafts. More it seems like it's reasonable, but I just want to make sure Measure Y committee people aren't really upset with it in some way. Thank you.
Understood, Tom, and duly noted. Myrna, I see you have a hand up. Did you want to make a comment?
Yes. So to address some of the early comments that we received from the Oversight Committee, one was from a member, Mike Neely, And he submitted spreadsheets, he did his own analysis, and to his credit, he showed the variance of how Measure Y is applied. And so the lack of a policy allows for a variation of applying funds to Measure Y. So year after year, that has changed, which creates lack of transparency and understanding for the commission, the oversight committee, the voters, and in a large part to the staff who, when they create their budgets and are paying bills, don't have clarity on how to process their own work. And so a lot of time is spent on trying to determine, what that split is, or if there's a split at all. And so that has created the variances that Member Neely has presented in his comments. And also to comment from Chair Brokaw is that, again, for where this policy intends to create consistency. So when the ratio is set at the beginning of the year, it'll be clear to the commission when it adopts the budget. It'll be clear to the oversight committee of what that ratio is, so that when the financial reports should be reflecting those percentages. And that is where the clarity and the consistency comes in for folks to understand where these splits come from. And they understand how and why the two major sources of funding are applied to our expenditures. So those that we're trying to solve a problem, these two major problems going forward.
So Myrna, I have one question that was raised in the public comments that we got from the two members of the Measure Y committee. And it has to do with the timing of the allocation of expenses. So for example, let's take one of the service-oriented divisions where, and let's just for the sake of discussion, say that we've agreed that based on anticipated revenues, that these expenses are going to be allocated 60% to property tax and 40% to sales tax. My question is, as expenses are incurred on a monthly basis, will they be allocated right away in that proportion? Or will they be allocated initially to property tax, and then there will be a subsequent reallocation done either monthly or quarterly, which I think is what has been done to some extent in the past?
So I could say that's how it was done the first 2 years of Measure Y. And that was when CFO Ken Neiman was in place. And since then, there were various ways of allocating. And again, that is the symptom of not having a clear policy on how to handle these expenditures.
So what is my question?
To your question is that with a policy from the get-go, which is an efficiency, soon as the PG&E, the utility bill comes in, there's no questions asked. The person entering the payment into the financial system knows automatically to split it 60%.
That's great, because the concern seemed to be, gee, if the Measure Y committee is meeting quarterly, will they be able to review things? And the answer is yes. Whatever they're reviewing will be timely, and the allocation will have been done. There won't be this need to recalculate, which I thought never made any sense.
Right, because the other way is you have at least two transactions, And the new way that we're proposing, just have one.
That's great. That's great. Well, listen, I know that it's late, and I do, first of all, I appreciate all of the thoughtful work that's gone into this, and thank you for socializing it with the Measure Y committee, both previously and again tomorrow. I appreciate the time that we have had to look at this and to think about it and how it's going to work. I'm feeling very encouraged, and I hope, in response to Tom's concerns, that you can come away from the meeting tomorrow feeling like we're all aligned that this is a far better and more practical approach that's consistent with both the letter and the spirit of the Measure Y language. So thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. And I can accept any questions, after this meeting as well.
Okay. I would like to thank the members of the committee and the staff and those who have listened in on the call. I know this has been a long meeting, a lot of important information. Our next Finance Committee meeting will be Monday, March 21st at 3 o'clock. And something I'm just going to mention as much a reminder to myself as to everyone else, given the fact that the commission is now down 2 members, the 5 of us who are on the Finance Committee are a majority of members. So we need to be really cognizant of that in any communications to avoid a Brown Act violation. And so the lesson for me is to route everything through Jen. We're fortunate. We just can't say goodbye, Jen. Fortunate that you're still here to help us. So my request would just be, let's be sure to communicate that way. And thank you all for your scrutiny, your good questions, and your participation. And the meeting is adjourned at 5:20.
Should we be doing something to tell the commission our opinion?
Well, I thought we were gonna, I'll be surprised, I'll tell you, Tom, I thought we were actually gonna take a vote, but I see that's not how this came up. It was indicated as an information item. So.
Well, I think you should say, other than my reservations that we want to make the Measure Y committee happy, we think it's probably as reasonable as we're going to come up with. Is that okay with everybody? I don't know.
That's certainly how I feel. I know Barbara's concerned about, feels that she's been rushed on this. And I'm sorry that you feel that way. I feel like we've had a lot of time to discuss it. Certainly interested in hearing if there's any conflicting views or concerns raised at tomorrow's meeting, but I feel comfortable advocating strongly that the commission adopt this.
Let me just say, if I may, that if I agree, and that if the Measure Y committee is fine with it tomorrow, that I think your recommendation as chair of the Finance Committee to the full commission, that we all accept this, and including Measure Y committee, I'd be very comfortable with that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Is Dave and Deborah, are you okay with that also?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is, and let's remember that this is an internal, this is an internal allocations policy as well. I mean, it's certainly ours, and because we have our hands on the budget, it's very important to us, but it's trying to help the staff do its job. And so how can we complain about that?
Yeah. And I think that it's also important to keep in mind that as we're getting into the budget cycle, it's really important that we have this in place so that Myrna and her team can do the work that they need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's it really is a terrific thing that you've done, Myrna. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've all
Thank you.
wanted it a long time, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your direction.
Okay. Any other concerns, final comments before we call this adjourned?
I have an item for the next agenda, but I'll email you. How about that?
Thank you. Yeah, let's do that because I don't see that as an agenda item here. Okay. We're going to adjourn at 5:23. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank
Thank you, Andy.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Andy. Bye-bye.